This is episode number 53 of Hitting for the Cycle. That's Ben Kruse. I'm Ryan Touhey. And the weather's getting cooler and cooler as we get more into October. And that means there's less and less baseball, which means that the postseason is getting closer to an end. And we're starting to get towards the most exciting part of the season, the World Series. So, Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Obviously, we have postseason ball. We have both of our championship series right now taken in full swing. And just myself doing well personally. Obviously, a ton of great sports and stuff going on right now. And, it's hoodie season as well. That's one of my favorite times of the year, so I can't complain about that. So, everything's going well.
Yeah, and we got a couple of things that we're going to get into for this episode. But before we do, we want to remind everybody, of course, please follow Hitting for the Cycle on Facebook, X, and Instagram at HFTC ETB. Follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network at ETB Network. Follow our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ETB Network right here down below. And finally, listen to us on whatever platforms you listen to your podcasts on.
Yep, and as always, folks, this episode is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. The NBA officially kicks off on Tuesday with, my Boston Celtics right here. Championships. They're getting their ring ceremony on Tuesday against the New York Knicks. So that should be a really fun matchup to start off the season. So make sure to join us for that on Tuesday night.
And hopefully my boys in Major League Baseball will be getting their rings next year on opening day in the Bronx. So we'll see about that. But obviously, we're, like Ben mentioned, we are now in the League Championship Series rounds in the Major League Baseball playoffs. Both the American League Division Series and the National League Division Series concluded last week. As we mentioned in the previous episode last week, the Mets defeated the Phillies. They were the first series to conclude. The Mets won that series, obviously, 3-1. And the other three series resulted in the Yankees defeating the Royals 3-1, and the Guardians defeating the Tigers 3-2, and the Dodgers defeating the Padres 3-2. So I went 2 for 4 in my predictions. I correctly predicted the Mets and the Yankees winning those series. I was incorrect. I had the Tigers winning over the Guardians, and I had the Padres winning over the Dodgers. And those two series, the way those ended, were kind of dramatic, especially for the Guardians and the Tigers. I quickly just want to recap Game 4 of that series. So in Game 4, that was a tight game. Obviously, the Tigers had a 2-1 lead going into Game 4, so they just needed one more win, and it was at Comerica Park. So the odds were kind of stacked against the Guardians. They had their backs against the wall, and it was tied 1-1 in the top of the fifth when Jose Ramirez hit a home run off Tyler Holton, and that made the score 2-1 Guardians. However, immediately the next inning, Zach McKinstry hit a home run off Tanner Bybee in the bottom of the fifth to tie things up for the Tigers. And the Tigers then took the lead in the bottom of the sixth on a Wenzel Perez RBI single. That made it 3-2 Detroit. And then David Fry in the top of the seventh inning hit a dramatic 2-run home run off Bo Brisky. That made it 4-3 Cleveland. The Guardians added another run in the top of the ninth inning on a sacrifice bunt that scored Brian Rocchio. And the Tigers did not go down without a fight, though. They made it 5-4 in the ninth inning on an RBI groundout by Chase Young that scored Justin Henry Malloy. However, Emmanuel Clase collected himself, got the last out. The Guardians won Game 4 by a score of 5-4, which sent that series back to Cleveland for a decisive Game 5. The crowd obviously was electric all day long. The game was actually supposed to be played at night, but it got moved to 1 o'clock due to impending weather. And in that game, the Guardians finally got to Tariq Skubal. Skubal, who's been untouchable all year, finally became human. Lane Thomas, a grand slam in the fifth inning, sent Cleveland into a frenzy, and that helped propel the Guardians to the American League Championship Series. you got to give the Guardians credit. They had their backs against the wall. The odds were kind of not in their favor, with all the previous times that they just were not able to get the job done. And if I'm not mistaken, that was the first time in a long time that they actually won. Game 4 was the first time in a long time that they won an elimination game. They had really not been successful in staving off eliminations before, but they were able to come through in that case scenario. And yeah, that was a very dramatic game 4. That was classic October baseball at its best. And the Guardians now are currently in the American League Championship Series against my New York Yankees. Like I mentioned, the Yankees defeated the Royals in 4 games, and the Yankees didn't really hit a lot in that League Division Series against the Royals. But they did get great starting pitching. Garrett Cole came through in Game 4. Things got kind of scary in the 6th and 7th innings, especially I think it wasn't Pasquantino. Kyle Isbell nearly gave Yankee fans a heart attack when he hit one all the way to the warning track. And on most days, this ball would have gone out of Kauffman Stadium, but fortunately the wind was on the Yankees side. The Yankees were leading 3-1 at that time. I believe it was the bottom of the 7th inning. Cole was at the end of his night, and Kyle Isbell was a tying run at the plate, and he hit one all the way to the warning track. And Juan Soto, with maybe 2-3 feet of room at Kauffman Stadium, made the catch against the wall to keep the Yankees leading 3-1. And that was basically the beginning of the end for the Royals. They went down quietly in both the 8th and 9th innings. The Yankee bullpen was superb. Great pitching from Clay Holmes, great pitching from Luke Weaver, and the Yankees advanced to the American League Championship Series. And those were pretty 2 interesting series in the American League. What did you think of the American League Division Series conclusions, Ben?
Yeah, I think the Guardians Tigers series, I mean, you kind of have, a matchup you don't really see often in the playoffs. And the Guardians, obviously, they're back against the wall. They've been a team. I mean, I know obviously we're going to talk about the ALCS in a little bit, but they've been a team being from behind a lot of games that really tend to struggle. They play a lot of small ball specifically, but David Fry came up massively. He hit a homer, Tigers are 2 innings away from getting to the next round. Instead, the Guardians had other plans, and they decided to go to a winner-take-all game against the Tigers ace, but not only the Tigers ace, but the arguably the best pitcher in the game. And the Guardians were only down by 1 run, and Lane Thomas, who was one of their acquisitions, who I think was a really good acquisition for them, really hasn't been working out, kind of all things considered, but then comes in a winner-take-all game and pretty much takes all that stuff behind the pass into one swing and pretty much lifted the Guardians into the next round, but that grand slam. So very exciting stuff for the Guardians, and now they're playing against your Yankees, Ryan, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think the Guardians obviously have had a really fun year. They're the 2nd best overall team. They've had a ton of pieces over there, but I can't help but also tip my cap to the Tiger season as well. Really, really fun season. Nobody expected them to get even to the playoffs, considered being, couple innings away from making the ALCS. So credit to AJ Hinch and credit to that team. Once they get a couple more pieces, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the AL Central as well. And then looking at your Yankees-Royals series, I'm not surprised with this overall matchup at all. The Royals, yes, they obviously have great starting pitching, but, the AL Central, when it comes to their offenses, when the Yankees essentially face the AL Central, essentially, they're chomping at the bit. They've owned this division for such a long period of time. But obviously you play who you play, and, the Yankees obviously took advantage of it. The Royals obviously have some pieces there. Of course, Wade and Perez, Pasquantino, they got some pieces there. But I just think specifically, there's not a ton of guys that have had massive playoff experience, and playoff experience takes a lot into it. The Yankees, of course, have had that with Judge and Stanton, Gleyber Torres. Gleyber Torres has been fantastic with you guys so far in the playoffs. And, of course, with Garrett Cole and Carlos Rodon, you guys obviously have some experience there too. The Yankees, of course, their bullpen, sensational. They didn't give up 1 run the whole entire series. I mean, that's obviously really, really great stuff for you all, Ryan. That's really hard to do, regardless of which team you face. So, got to tip my cap for you guys on that. So, but the Royals, I think, have something else, kind of like the Tigers as well too. They definitely have something that they can build on. Of course, Bobby Witt and Salvi, and a bunch of guys there. Even Michael Massey, I think, kind of really broke onto the scene this year as well too. So if they can get some couple other stars like Bobby Wynn and some other pieces there, they're going to be a force as well. So yeah, obviously you guys had a really good series. I will say that, Ryan, I think that the Royals had a ton of chances on the base pass, and they couldn't cash in. That was obviously something that you give credit to the Yankees pitching for. But really, like, outside of when they tied it off with Clark Schmidt, they really just kind of didn't keep themselves, with you guys. I think for the most part, most of these games, you guys pretty much were in control of. So I give you guys credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, all the games were relatively close. I mean, the Yankees never really clobbered the Royals. I mean, the Royals, put up a good fight, but yeah, like you said, they just didn't really take more advantage of opportunities that they were given. And obviously, with Bobby Witt struggling, he did not have a good series at all. But
Crazy.
yeah,
I'm shocked about that. I really am.
I'm honestly not, because I just feel like that happens a lot with star players, especially when they enter the postseason for the first time in their career.
Mm-hmm.
If they're a young player too, I just feel that they just tend to get pitched to the most carefully by the opposition. And the Yankees pitched very carefully to Bobby Witt. They knew he was a threat at the plate no matter what the situation was. And, give the Yankee pitching credit. They were great against him. I mean, Salvador Perez, even though he's in his mid-30s, continues to rake. He's obviously, a force to be reckoned with. And, he's definitely done a great job of, providing leadership and experience to that Royals team. And the Royals, they have a contention window right now, and they're going to be looking to build upon this season, obviously, for the foreseeable future. And the Tigers, give credit to them. Nobody expected the Tigers to make the playoffs. They had a magical run towards the end. AJ Hinch dethroning his old team in ALCS appearances at 7. So the Tigers and the Royals, it's going to be interesting to see how the AL Central plays out in the coming years. Those two teams could, form or could redevelop a pretty bitter rivalry. So it should be interesting. Both of those teams, I think, have a bright future ahead of them. We'll see which team has more success in the coming years, which team will take off more in the AL Central. The AL Central, it always seems every year has a new division winner. So it's going to be interesting. I'm really intrigued to see what happens, what's to come. So that was the American League Division Series. And in the National League Division Series, both of us were pretty confident that the Padres were going to defeat the Dodgers. The Dodger pitching staff going into that series was a huge question mark. Obviously, they had lost Tyler Glasnow right before the postseason. I thought that was detrimental to them. But the Dodger pitching just turned in a performance for the ages in the final 2 games of that NLDS. The Dodgers trailed 2-1 going into Game 4. The Dodgers were starting Ryan Brazier as an opener in Game 4.
Yeah.
And everybody, you're a Red Sox hero. And everybody, including myself, thought this series was over. Brazier, I thought, was washed up. I thought he was done. I thought he had no chance against that Padre lineup.
Yeah.
But the Padres kind of raised some eyebrows too by starting Dylan Cease on 3 days rest. And that was the first time in his career that he ever did that. And to the surprise of many, the Dodgers were all over Dylan Cease. Mookie Betts leading off, well, not leading off, but he hit a home run in the first inning of Game 4, his second home run in as many days. Betts obviously has been criticized for not showing up in the postseason in recent years, but he really redeemed himself in this year's NLDS. And the Padres, they stopped hitting. They just stopped hitting. And, in Game 4, the Dodgers jumped ahead 5-0 after 3 innings, knocking Cease right out of the game. And from that moment on, it was all Dodgers. The Dodgers held the Padres scoreless for the final 24 innings of the NLDS. After the second inning of Game 3, when the Padres scored 6 runs against Walker Buehler, nothing, absolutely nothing. The Padres They had no answers for the Dodger pitching at all, which was so surprising considering how much of a question mark the Dodger pitching was going into this series, like I just mentioned. And going into Game 5, it was Yoshinobu Yamamoto against Yu Darvish, a rookie against a veteran, 2 Japanese players. And Yamamoto stepped up huge. There was all this talk about, will that contract, live up to the hype? Because Yamamoto, it was kind of a weird season. He got off to a good start, and then he obviously went down with an injury. And then once the playoffs started, he got rocked in his first playoff start. And, the pressure was on. And the Dodgers, for so many years have just not won the big game when it counts. And they did this time around. Yamamoto was spectacular. The Dodger pitching continued to just carve up the Padre lineup. The Padre lineup had no answers whatsoever. And the Padres, who were, mocking Dodger fans or talking trash to Dodger fans, granted, Dodger fans kind of deserved it because they were not on their best behavior in game 2. They were just stunned, and they were held to just 2 hits in game 5. The Dodgers got 2 home runs. Kike Hernandez, who just seems to be on another level in the playoffs, hit a home run. Teoscar Hernandez hit a home run, and that was all the Dodgers needed. They won game 5 2-0 to get revenge on the Padres, who upset them in the 2022 division series, ruining their 111th season. And boy, oh boy, was that sweet victory for the Dodgers and their fans. And the Dodgers, the Dodgers, they definitely get criticized a lot for, when they don't deliver in the clutch, because it's just happens way too frequently. But you know what? You got to give them credit where it's due for everything that they've been through this year with all the injuries and the amount of money that they spent in the offseason. At the end of the day, all that matters is winning it all. And obviously, they still haven't won it all just yet. They still have to win 2 more rounds. But to get revenge on the Padres, I have to imagine, is very, very sweet.
Yeah, that's who would have thought, Ryan? With us, essentially, we both had the Padres winning that series. When they were up that one game for winner take all with my guy Ryan Brazier, who Ryan Brazier should not be a pitcher still for that Dodgers team. Yeah, he was causing Dodger fans panic yesterday, even last night when they're up 4 runs. But that's Ryan Brazier for you. But yeah, I think that the Padres offense, just the fact that the Dodgers pitching was able to pretty much stymie the Padres offense, which guys with Machado and Tatis. Tatis was phenomenal, by the way, in that series. Jackson Merrill, it's not like the Padres don't have guys in their offense. Their offense is really, really good. And the Dodgers did a really good job of being able to pretty much hold them in check for those last 2 games. Yamamoto in the winner-take-all game. The crazy part was, too, Ryan, Darvish pitched really well as well in that winner-take-all game, too. He just never got any hits on his opposition side for his overall team. So, Yamamoto, you give him all the credit in the world. He was great. But Darvish was also pretty much good at the same time. It was just a matter of the Padres' offense, pretty much the biggest storyline for this overall series, in which it was phenomenal the first couple of games, and then it pretty much died out for them for the last couple. So that pretty much was the reason why that they're not moving on to where they were supposed to be. So, I think that they got a really interesting offseason ahead of them for sure. The Padres do. They have a ton of, guys in between, Xander and Tatis. They have a ton of guys that they definitely want to kind of keep on focusing for their long term, their core. But yeah, give the credit to the Dodgers. They obviously, the Padres, I guess, were pretty much kind of slaying the dragon a couple years ago, but now the Dodgers pretty much are like, yeah, we're still kind of remembering that we're the top beast here in the overall division. And, they were able to take control of that and move on to face the Mets right now in the championship series. So, credit to the Dodgers, man. And their pitching, their bullpen, man, has been absolutely money. Blake Trinan, Brazier even. I know I criticized Brazier, but that's kind of me for me being a Red Sox fan with him. But yeah, their bullpen has been phenomenal as well too. Between their starting pitching and their bullpen. And the crazy part we talked about, Ryan, we didn't know in terms of how the starting pitching for the Dodgers would be kind of coming in. They're very shorthanded, but kind of listening to the Dodgers-Mets game last night, this Dodgers team is kind of just piecing them together right now. They're pretty much kind of making it where it's not like the all, super team type of thing. It's more of like they're a depleted type of team. They're just kind of finding ways to win games. And that's pretty much what you're trying to do at this point in time in October. Just trying to win games and trying to move on to the next round.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Darvish was terrific in game 5, and he actually lasted longer than Yamamoto did. And his pitch count was very low. He made 2 big mistakes, just 2 pitches that just left the ballpark. And unfortunately, that was enough for the Dodgers. The Dodgers only got 4 hits in game 5, but the Padres only got 2. The Padre offense just completely went silent. So, yeah, you're right. The Padres definitely do have an interesting offseason ahead for them, and we'll see what happens with them. That's a tough loss for the Padres. That's a really tough pill to swallow. And like I thought for sure that they were the better team than the Dodgers, even though the Dodgers won the division. The Padres did win the season series over them too. That was the first time in a long time that had happened. So it's kind of shocking. It really is. I did not expect the Dodger offense to just fall dead like that. I thought of all the offenses in baseball in this year's postseason, the Padres had the best offense. But yeah, it was nowhere to be found. Yep, that's postseason baseball for you. Sometimes expect the unexpected. So as we mentioned, because of that, the Dodgers moved on to the NLCS, and their pitching has kept it going in this series for 2 out of the 3 games. So right now, it's the Mets and the Dodgers in the National League Championship Series. This is a rematch of the 1988 National League Championship Series, where the Dodgers went on that miracle run to the World Series and upset the Mets in that series. The Mets were heavily favored in 1988. They won 100 games, and obviously were just 2 years removed from a world championship. Not many people gave the Dodgers a chance. So that's a different story, though, for another day. But the Dodgers right now, as the day of this recording, we're recording this now on Thursday, October 17th. Currently, the Dodgers lead the series 2-1, and in the 2 games that they've won, the pitching has continued to just stifle the opposition's bats. The Dodgers were all over the Mets in Game 1, all over Kadai Senga. I don't know why the Mets continue to run Senga out there in the postseason, honestly. And the Mets just did not look good in Game 1 at all. They kind of got a dose of reality delivered to them as well. And the Dodgers won 9-0. They didn't hit a single home run, but they played fundamental baseball. They hit with runners in scoring position. Shohei Ohtani loves to hit with men on base. He can't hit with nobody on base.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is.
There was some stat out there that I saw with him. I think he's like 10 for like his last 20 or whatever. I don't know. I'm just making up a number. But it's 1 for like his last like 27th guys without. It's crazy.
Yeah. But Jack Flaherty was terrific in Game 1. Kadai Senga was not. And the Dodgers cruised to a 9-0 victory. A bunch of guys contributed in this game. Max Muncy, he hit a 2-run single in the bottom of the first that scored Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman, and that was with 2 outs, by the way. And the Dodgers for so many years just couldn't come through with 2 outs in a clutch situation in the postseason, but they're starting to do that much more often now in this year's postseason. Gavin Lux also delivered. Tommy Edman had a good game. Kike Hernandez continued to have a good game. So it was all Dodgers in Game 1. Then in Game 2, the Mets responded thanks in part to a Mark Vientos grand slam off Ryan Brazier. Brazier was great in Game 4 against the Padres. He was not great at all in Game 2 of the NLCS against the Mets. It was a very quick turnaround as well. The game was not even played 24 hours after Game 1. But the Mets won that game 7-3, snapping the Dodgers' 3-game shutout streak. And the Mets won that game 7-3, like I mentioned. But then last night in Game 3 at Citi Field, the Dodgers punched the Mets right back in the mouth. 8-0. Another shutout victory for them. That's 4 shutout wins in 5 games for the Dodgers. Shohei Ohtani hit a home run that nearly went out of Citi Field. That was one of the longest home runs I ever saw hit at Citi Field. It was just ridiculous. Kike Hernandez also hit another home run. Max Muncy hit a bomb too. Yeah. And Severino pitched for the Mets last night. He wasn't horrible, but he wasn't great. He was like running into jams a lot, but he was getting out of them for the most part. But it was all Dodgers again last night in Game 3. And right now the Dodgers have a lead 2-1. The series has kind of been strange. I thought this would be much more tightly contested in terms of the scores, but each game has not been close. I mean, obviously 2 blowout shutout wins by the Dodgers. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first time in their history that they've won 3 shutout games by margins of 7 runs or more. I think that's the first time that's ever happened to them, because there was a stat on that after the end of the game last night. So yeah, the Dodgers lead the series 2-1, and I have the Dodgers winning this series because I think that series victory over the Padres just unlocked something in them. I think they just needed a spark. They needed something to look at for some motivation. And I think, shutting down that Padre offense after the Padres had just been a thorn in their side for the past 3 seasons. I think that kind of set the tone that the Dodgers are going to be, are going to put up a good fight in the series, regardless of all the question marks of their pitching. I mean, I don't know how many question marks you can still have after they just delivered another shutout victory last night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this overall series so far has been very up and down, like you mentioned it. I expected a lot more of these games to be tight and stuff like that. But with the way that the pitching was kind of the second half of that series against San Diego, they basically carried it over to this series. And, you got to give credit for some guys, for instance, Walker Buehler last night. Really, the outing he had against the Padres, he pretty much had that really bad second, third inning, and pretty much his line was completely unraveling. And it looked like that in the game last night too, where the Mets, the biggest part of the game last night, I mean, the series is tied, like you mentioned. The Dodgers really, Jack Flair was phenomenal. Kodai Senga wasn't. The Mets lineup just was, held in check for that first game. Second game, the Dodgers had a bullpen game. Lindor had that leadoff homer, and then Vientos had that grand slam. That pretty much was all she wrote. Sean Manaea continues to be the ace for the Mets. He's been absolutely phenomenal. And the game, like I mentioned just now, Luis Severino, he wasn't bad, like you mentioned. He wasn't great, but the infield for the Mets wasn't great either. They should have theoretically had, it was the walk, and then they had the error. Francisco Alvarez, who, by the way, has been awful for them recently. I don't know when the hell happened to him, because for a while he looked like one of the best hitting catchers, kind of like Austin Wells right now, in terms of how you guys are doing with him. Something's off with both the catchers in New York. I don't know what happened to them. Who put the magic on them right now? But he, threw it over to Lindor, or I think it was Iglesias, and it was first and second instead of one out. And then it was deflection right to Severino. He bobbles it. He only gets one out instead of potential double play. So the infield really didn't also help Severino as well. But the Dodgers really, regardless if that was going to be the end or not, they were the much better team last night once again. And Walker Buehler was able to pretty much get a lot of these jams where the Mets could have made this game interesting. Of course, striking out Alvarez, of course, when it was one out, bases loaded, pitch right down the middle. And then the Lindor at bat, I thought Lindor was going to come out big with kind of the way it's been all postseason. But instead, Walker Buehler has a nasty curveball on Lindor. He strikes him out. And then they had countless chances still when they had a couple of guys on the pond. It wasn't like the Mets weren't trying. They had a bunch of guys on the pond, but never, ever made this game close. And, got to give credit to the Dodgers pitching. It felt like they were going to crack sometimes last night, and they weren't. And their defense and their hitting has been the reason why they're up 2-1 right now. I will say this, Ryan, of course, now talking about the predictions, I wouldn't count the Mets out yet. They're down 2-1, but they've been showing a ton of resiliency so far in this postseason, where you feel like there's been countless times the season's been over for them, this and that. And they have Jose Quintana on the bump tonight, in which a guy that's been absolutely great for them, and a lot of winner-take-all games and a lot of pressurized situations. Yamamoto's going tonight for the Dodgers. He's had 2 outings so far. The first one, he gave up 5 runs in 3 innings. The second one, he was a lot better in. So what type of Yamamoto are you going to get for tonight? However, tonight's the game, though, that the Mets really need to win. If they go down 3-1, I think the Dodgers are going to win this series in like 5 games. If the Mets win tonight, I still think the Dodgers are going to win, but I do think that the Dodgers are going to win in 6 games. I feel like that they're going to win back at their place. I just feel like, specifically like we talked about, I trust their pitcher right now more. I trust their offense. They're really starting to hit the ball a lot more with guys on base. And the Mets' magic, as great as it's been, as great as their season has been, I just think that the Dodgers are going to be too much for them.
Yeah, I mean, that Lindor at bat, I quickly just want to touch on that. Once Buehler struck out Lindor, I thought that was it. I didn't really think that the Mets were going to have another shot. I mean, like you mentioned, they still had some traffic on the bases in the following innings, but that was the moment that the Mets needed to cash in on. And Lindor has been the guy all year. And it was a rare time where he didn't come through. And, give Buehler and the Dodger pitching credit. They just stifled the Mets bats again all night long. And yeah, the series is not over by any stretch of the imagination. The Mets have been the most resilient team all season long in Major League Baseball. You think they're done, but then they come back out of nowhere. So I do think that the Mets are going to take at least one of these next 2 games at Citi Field. I do think that the series is going back to Los Angeles for a Game 6 at least. And yeah, if the Dodgers go ahead 3-1, I do think the Mets will stave off elimination in Game 5 to send the series back to California. But I do think that the Dodgers will eventually wrap it up in Game 6 there. But we'll see what happens. I could be wrong. I mean, I was wrong with 2 division series, so I could be wrong with this LCS. But yeah, hopefully these games become a little closer as the series goes on and just doesn't keep resulting in blowouts. So yeah, that's how the NLCS has been going. And now for the ALCS between the Yankees and the Guardians, the Yankees currently have a 2-0 lead in this best-of-7 series. And as a Yankee fan, I don't have too much to complain about right now, being up 2-0. However, I will say, as a baseball fan, this is some of the ugliest baseball I've ever seen in my life. Game 2 was so hideous on both ends. The Guardians, who are usually praised for being a fundamentally sound defensive team, were playing like the Bad News Bears. Brian Rocchio dropping a pop-up. Will Brennan in the outfield just juggling the baseball like a bar of soap out there. The Yankees being absolute, as John Sterling liked to call it, drunks on the base paths in the 6th inning. Jazz Chisholm and Anthony Rizzo getting picked off second base. The Guardians were throwing wild pitches left and right in game 1. I mean, this series has just been hideous to watch. And the Yankees right now, like I said, have a 2-0 lead. But basically, I think this has just been a battle of who can look worse on the field right now. And right now, the Guardians look much worse than the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees, even though they have a 2-0 lead, they continue to not hit with runners in scoring position. They're absolutely abysmal in those situations. I've noticed how, Gleyber Torres, like you mentioned, he's been great this postseason. I'm not knocking on Gleyber Torres. I will knock on him, though, for when he comes to bat with men on base, because whenever he comes to bat with men on base, he swings at the first pitch every freaking time. And it's either a pop-up or a ground out.
Yeah.
So, he needs to come up with nobody on base, honestly, at this point. He's the opposite of what Ohtani is. And that's really where Torres is. Judge, obviously, his postseason woes continue. He is not having a good postseason again this year. It is driving me and many other Yankee fans up a tree. However, he finally broke through in game 2. He had a monstrous home run to dead center field, which I thought was not going to go out. I thought it was going to die at the warning track. But I think it was aided by the wind. I think the wind helped push that out a little bit more of the stadium. And the Yankees cruised to a 6-3 win in game 2 after winning 5-2 in game 1. I was at game 1, by the way, and I sat in the 400 level. That was one of the coldest baseball games I ever attended in person. I mean, I had to order hot chocolate at the concession stand, and I burnt my tongue beforehand. That's just how cold it was at that stadium. But, I mean, the Yankee pitching continues to dominate. Carlos Rodon was phenomenal in game 1. He showed up, and he completely just shut down the Cleveland Bats. I think he had 9 or 10 strikeouts. I think it was 9 strikeouts in game 1. The only mistake he made was a solo home run to Brian Rocchio in the 6th inning. And, the Yankee bullpen continued to come through. Luke Weaver is just having an amazing postseason. He's just been untouchable ever since he became the closer for the Yankees. And Clay Holmes has finally found it. Holmes, who just could not get it together as the closer all season long. The Yankees finally found the right role for him as the 7th and 8th inning guy. He's the setup man to Luke Weaver. I mean, for the most part, Boone has been going to Holmes and Weaver, every night. And, why stop so far? Don't fix what's not broken.
Yep.
And, the Yankees right now, their MVPs this whole postseason have been Holmes and Weaver and the bullpen, if you ask me. Giancarlo continues to rake, though. You cannot exclude him. He had another home run in game 1. Juan Soto hit his first postseason home run as a Yankee, also in game 1 as well. And, right now things are looking good for the Yankees. I'm going into game 3. Clark Schmidt's on the mound tonight. Obviously, this is a must-win game for the Guardians. And I will say, as a Yankee fan, obviously I'm happy to be up 2-0. I'd rather be up 2-0 than down 0-2. But I will say I wouldn't be, so distraught if we lost tonight, because if we were to go up 3-0, I still have nightmares about 2004 to this very day. I do not want that to happen ever again. I do not want that to happen ever again.
Okay.
But that was a long time ago, and that was a much different team. In the 2004 Red Sox are a much different team than the 2024 Guardians.
Yeah.
So, but the last time the Yankees were up 2-0 in ALCS was 2009 against the Angels, back when the Angels were actually good. And obviously we know the Yankees went on to win that series and the World Series as well. So, yeah, the Yankees are looking good, despite some ugly base running that has just plagued them for so many years at this point. But, they're up 2-0. That's all that matters. And we'll see if they can wrap it up in Cleveland.
Yeah. For me, Ryan, and this is coming from a non-Yankee perspective on things, I've been obviously just seeing the people on Twitter, the non-Yankee fans, saying, "Well, the Yankees they've been having the easiest path over to being the Royals, being the Guardians, for the the AL Central teams of which they absolutely own." Listen, and I'm actually defending you, Ryan, because of course I've had obviously kind of my takes on this type of stuff because I don't want to ruffle any feathers by your chance by any means, right? The Yankees deserve to be in this spot because they were the 1 seed. They don't control specifically who they play because even with that rough patch specifically during the part of your season, the Orioles never took advantage of that. So you want to talk about the team specifically to blame. It's really the teams that beat themselves. The Orioles, the Astros, the 2 teams that had the better lineups. I look at the overall lineups in terms of who the Yankees have been facing. The Astros and the Orioles had the better lineups when you look at kind of the whole entire picture in the American League of who the forces would be to match the Yankees overall, right? The Guardians and the Royals, the Guardians have a really pesky type of team. They're more of a contact hitting team. And the Royals specifically, they're where they were because of their pitching. So really, I think that you guys, you obviously been saying the Yankees haven't been looking good, of course, in this overall series, but the benefit of being the 1 seed is because you've had the home field. Having the home field, Ryan, the first 2 games, especially in New York, are incredible, right, to have. So, and you kind of been showing it with the fans that you guys been having so far. So, heck, I'm defending you in the case of like, listen, if my Red Sox specifically were the 1 seed and, we're saying we had an easy path, this and that, what are they going to say, right? It's what it is. So, I've been kind of knocking on kind of the other side of things, but I'm defending on you in terms of this case. The Guardians, listen, they're a fun team. They're a pesky team per se. They just got past the Tigers. They're down 2-0. The Yankees, obviously, like you mentioned, the last game was completely sloppy from both sides. Your base running specifically wasn't great, but obviously Judge stepping up was massive. That home run was absolutely incredible. And your pitching. Kyle Rodon, Garrett Cole. I know Cole wasn't great, like you mentioned off the air to me in game 2, but the thing is with the Guardians, they're kind of like the Royals right now. They're not capitalizing with guys on base. The Yankees have had chances to capitalize on base, and they've had a lot more success in that case right now. Anthony Rizzo, Ryan, you got to give credit to him as well too. He low-key has come back with fingers that I don't know how he's been able to hit a bat with, and he's been one of your best hitters so far. He's been very kind of down in that lineup and kind of been like, oh, Rizzo's back. And you can kind of put as well Cabrera on the bench right now. He's kind of a threat you can have off the bench. And, if you can get, obviously Glaber, like you mentioned, he hasn't been great with guys on base, but he's still been phenomenal in the leadoff spot. If you can get Judge going, Jazz Chisholm, your trade acquisition, I think has been very up and down right now ever since that Royal series. So it's not like you guys have been clicking yet. And for me specifically, I'm not – as a Red Sox fan, I would never want to see the Yankees start to click again, but I do think you guys have that next level as well, too. If you guys are going to get to the World Series, in which I'm not going to jinx anything, you guys are up 2-0. I don't think this series is over yet. I know I've been saying out the air that it has been because, you just never know, right? Even if the Guardians go, win tonight, I still think that you guys are just the better team on paper specifically, but you still got to play the games, and the Guardians need to win, though, tonight. If they lose tonight, it is over. Like you mentioned, you say you get nightmares about the 0-4 Red Sox. The comparisons between the 0-4 Red Sox and this Guardians team is bar none. Listen, I'd be completely stunned if the Guardians even made this a close series. I really am. But we'll see. Like I said, tonight obviously you guys have Clark Schmidt. He was good in the first game against the Royals, and the Guardians had Matthew Boyd. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, there are a few things that, obviously I'm concerned about with the Yankee lineup. Obviously, you touched on Austin Wells a little while ago. Wells has had a miserable postseason. I definitely think it would be beneficial for him and for the Yankees if they just sat him for game 3 or 4, maybe both games too.
Another thing, too, really quick, was people been saying for the Yankees to move him down the lineup. Would you move him down the lineup, too, and kind of have Stan maybe get moved up with Judge, maybe?
Either Stan or Rizzo. One of the two. Many people were saying, put Rizzo in the cleanup spot and move Wells to 8th, which I think is a good idea. I mean, even though Rizzo is playing with 3 fingers on his right hand, I mean, he, like you mentioned, he has been one of the most productive hitters in that lineup, and he has not, lost a beat, ever since taking that pitch off his hands at the last weekend of the season. But I think I saw some reports. Michael Kay touched on this on his radio show, I think yesterday. I think Boone is going to sit Wells tonight, especially since Cleveland's got a lefty going for them tonight. I forget who it is exactly off the top of my head, but I think it's going to be
Boyd.
Matt Boyd. Yes, so I think it's going to be Trevino behind the plate. Trevino hasn't seen live pitching in a long time, so I wouldn't expect much from him from an offensive standpoint tonight. Obviously the biggest risk with putting Trevino behind the plate is that he has no arm whatsoever. The Guardians are known to be a very are known for their base running and stealing bases. You get guys like Steven Kwan, Andre Jimenez, and Jose Ramirez on base. It's going to be a long night for Trevino. He just does not have a good arm, and expect them to take advantage of that. So that's always a risk when you bring in a guy like Trevino behind the plate, although he is a good defender in other aspects like blocking and framing and stuff like that. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's obviously must win for Cleveland. And yeah, they got to step up. I mean, too often they're just not taking advantage of opportunities. All they're getting are sac flies or RBI groundouts. They need to come through. I mean, Jose Ramirez. I mean, he had a home run in game 2, but that was in the 9th inning with nobody on base, and you're already down 6-2. I mean, he was up with 2 on, I think, in the 3rd or 4th inning, and he didn't come through. For all the talent that Ramirez has, he just does not get it done when it matters the most in the postseason for the most part. I say that now and watch him hit a grand slam tonight. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But the series is not over yet. I'm trying not to. I do not count out the Guardians. Like you said, they're a pesky team. They're a good team, and I think the series is going to have kind of a different tone in Cleveland compared to New York. The Guardians just looked kind of intimidated of New York in a way. Like they just they looked shaken up, especially their pitching. Their pitching just looks very, very shaken in the early innings because the Yankees immediately put pressure on them in the first innings in games 1 and 2. They got out of it in game 1. They didn't get out of it in game 2. I mean, that poor kid in game 1, I forget his name off the top of my head, threw 4 wild pitches, which ties a record, by the way, for a postseason game with Rick Ankiel of the St. Louis Cardinals in game 1 of the 2000 National League Division Series. And Ankiel, as we all know, was suffering from a case of the yips. He eventually had to be converted to an outfielder. So, yeah, that's company you don't want to be a part of.
I just don't think, Ryan, the Guardians starting pitching. I mean, maybe Bieber, if he was healthy, maybe we can give him a boost, but I don't really. I mean, the Royals obviously had some decent pitching, with Waka and Lugo and Reagans, but like the Guardians just don't have that. And if you need to specifically win an overall playoff series, especially against a good team like you guys, you need to have starting pitching. It's just one of the biggest things we need.
That was Joey Cantillo, by the way, who threw 4 wild pitches. So I never heard of him until that game, honestly.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, even though the Guardians have also been taking out their starters relatively early too. And I know that the Guardians arguably have the best bullpen in baseball, but their bullpen has also kind of been shaky this series as well. I mean, and Class A hasn't made an appearance yet in this series. I mean, Cleveland had walked 7 batters and threw 5 wild pitches in all, and that equals a postseason record. That was game 1.
You didn't get playoff series like that.
No. So the Guardians have just been playing very sloppy. We'll see if the momentum changes for them as they come back home to Progressive Field. Progressive Field is known to be a very rowdy environment for any visiting position, for any team, for any visiting team. So the Guardians obviously need their fans to be loud and proud. So we'll see how things go for them. If this series gets to at least game 5, the next 2 series are definitely for certain, and they will be played in Cleveland, Ohio. So Yanks lead that series 2-0. And by next week, we'll know who's in the World Series, obviously. And so now we're going to move on. So last week, like we mentioned, Hurricane Milton struck the state of Florida, unfortunately, and it knocked the roof off of Tropicana Field. And not to the surprise of me or I'm sure anybody else, Tropicana Field is not going to be ready for opening day 2025, which leaves another Major League Baseball team without a home. Obviously, the A's are not going to be at the Coliseum next year, so they're going to have to be playing in Sacramento, home of the Sacramento River Cats. So they're playing at a AAA ballpark. And the Rays They have some questions obviously that need to be answered. They do have some options though. I mean, a lot of teams play their spring training games in the state of Florida, so I'm sure they can find a stadium that that can suit them. I'm reading this off the Tampa Bay Times. This is coming from Mark Topkin. I'm sorry, of the Tampa Bay Times, and he proposed a few stadiums that the Rays could possibly look at for next year at the beginning. St. Petersburg's Al Lang Stadium. I don't know much about that stadium at all. There's that one. Clearwater's Baycare Ballpark, which I actually visited. That's the spring training home of the Philadelphia Phillies. That's in Clearwater. It's a very pretty stadium. I do like that. I do like that one. There's Dunedin's TD Ballpark.
Yep.
That's the spring training home of the Blue Jays. And there's also Steinbrenner Field, the spring training home for the Yankees. The Yankees spring training ballpark is the most feel of a major league stadium because there's no grass area out there in the outfield. It's pretty much all stands for the most part. It's also the biggest spring training ballpark in terms of seating capacity in the state of Florida. So I could see, and that's also in Tampa. I think I could see that happening, but I also could see the Rays rotating around these stadiums as well, because some of these minor league teams of these minor league affiliates of these major league teams, I'm sure they're going to be playing at that stadium the same day that the Rays are scheduled for a home game. So in other words, I could see the Rays playing at Baycare Ballpark in Clearwater one weekend, and then once the weekend's over, they go to Steinbrenner Field for the following series, which would be a gigantic pain in the ass for the Rays to do. It would actually be miserable. And also, don't forget, this is Florida, so these players with no roof are going to be baking in the sun for a lot of the time. So I think the majority of these games are going to have to be played at night to avoid some severe sunburn. But this is also a quote from per Jim Bowden. Hurricane Milton damage to the roof at Tropicana Field is a bigger deal than most understand. It would cost 9 figures to replace, and moving into new ballpark in a few years doesn't make sense. So the Rays can't play there with no draining system for no rain. So there could be a chance. I don't know if there will be a chance, but I mean, the Rays could. Will it even be worth going back to Tropicana Field if it's going to be torn down in a couple of years? So there's just a lot of question marks surrounding the Rays. The Rays, as we know, are not the wealthiest team in baseball, but they do have a new stadium coming up. So I don't know. I mean, do they pull in athletics and play around minor league ballparks, AAA ballparks, spring training ballparks for the next couple of years? If that happens, that will be comical and depressing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not too surprised, which, by the way, Ron, I know we obviously talked about it. We obviously don't want to see this obviously kind of go down, but my prayers and my thoughts are still with the Florida community, of course.
Yes.
I know obviously kind of the remnants and all that stuff is basically over, but of course, still a lot of people are probably without power. There's obviously a ton of cleanup. The Tampa Bay Lightning, which I hate to cross sports, but they just had their first home game in Tampa, I think yesterday or the day before, because obviously the stuff going on. So the whole city is trying to kind of get themselves back in the swing of things, the Tampa, St. Pete area. So, I mean, there's still a lot kind of getting themselves back on track. The whole state of Florida is. But, yeah, I mean, I'm not too surprised. I mean, obviously the cables and stuff like we talked about last week, there was a ton of them that was pretty much hovering that roof. And with all the winds and stuff, that basically kind of took all that stuff into the top of that roof and basically collapsed everything. It's going to, it's going to take forever to basically kind of get that even to a degree of looking kind of back like it again. So, yeah, I think that, there's a ton of minor league teams. I know that you mentioned that Steinbrenner Field in Tampa. I've been there before. I haven't seen a game there, but I went to a game across the street over at Tampa Bay Buccaneers football stadium because it's right across the street from there. Tampa has a minor league team that plays, I believe, at Steinbrenner Field. So there's a ton of teams that kind of play at those overall parks. So they can kind of flip-flop their overall schedules. Another thing, too, that I take into effect as well, I'm pretty sure, is the minor league schedule is a little bit less than the major league schedule. I think they don't play as many games. So theoretically, they can kind of work things out. But I think that most of the games are going to be during at night. I feel like maybe some of the minor league games maybe down there could be more during the day to kind of maybe flip that and kind of figure things out. And I think that the sales and stuff like that, I think really increase. If you have a major league team now that goes and plays at different of these AAA ballparks, I mean, minor league baseball obviously doesn't get a ton of recognition. And then if, all of a sudden you'd be like, all right, the Tampa Bay Rays, which I know as an organization isn't a great iconic organization, but just a major league team in general that can kind of go around in different spots in the Tampa area. I think that's kind of really interesting. Kind of just, you can kind of get some sales highly in different places than others. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to have to kind of work things out. I do agree with you. I mean, Tropicana Field, I know it's probably had its memories back in the past, but obviously with the roof specifically and everybody kind of concerning it, I've been there before. There's nothing special about it. I legitimately was only in there because I had a second-degree sunburn during my trip down in Florida. I legitimately couldn't be outside specifically the day after. The Rays are playing a game against the Miami Marlins. I could care less specifically about that. I had no dog in the fight. But my dad told me, he's just like, well, Ben, you can't be outside, this next day. We have a Rays game playing inside. You want to go to that? I'm like, all right, let's play out. It's a baseball game inside. And, it's not real baseball, but I do remember just going in there, just the overall concourse. It's just not the same. So I don't know. I mean, if the Rays want to kind of keep it and they kind of want to work things out with it, by all means, go ahead. But I think, like you mentioned, down the road, they're going to have a new ballpark anyway. I feel like maybe they can kind of start with this project maybe a little bit earlier for a new ballpark if they haven't already, because I just don't see a reason where they can kind of just, kind of create something back into old Tropicana Field. If theoretically down the road in a couple of years, it's going to be a new ballpark anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation. I mean, from the way I see it, I think for the most part, the Rays are just going to be rotating around minor league and spring training ballparks for at least, I'd say, 2 months. I mean, I'm no construction expert by any means, but from the damage that I've seen, I mean, that could take probably up to a year, I think, honestly, to repair.
Even more.
Maybe more. So, yeah, I really don't know if the Rays – I mean, I don't know if the Rays are going to move back to Tropicana Field, and I don't know if the Rays even know if they're going to move back to Tropicana Field. So, I mean, I think for the most part, if I had to guess, I would have to say they're probably going to be playing the majority of their home games, at least for this season, rotating around Baycare, Steinbrenner Field, and Dunedin, where the Blue Jays play. I think that's how they're going to probably have to do this. I mean, there was social media. People were saying, could the Rays play in Oakland? They're not going to play in Oakland. This is they're an American League East team. They're not going to make their division rivals go out west twice. They're not going to do that. They are not going to Miami. Miami and Tampa are not neighbors. Miami is further south down in Florida. It's at least a 3-hour drive away from Tampa. They're not going to Miami. They're probably going to have to just play at some AAA and spring training ballparks. There's a lot of
Orlando doesn't really have a park either, too. Like a ballpark.
There's a lot. I mean, fortunately, there's a lot of baseball stadiums around Florida. A lot of teams have their spring training in Florida. They will find a place there. That's probably what they're going to have to do. It's unfortunate. It sucks. And again, we do wish everybody well in Florida. You're in our prayers. I mean, fortunately, I spoke with my father and my friend. They're doing fine. Fortunately, there was no damage there, and I hope many people are at least better now than they were a week ago. But I know there's a lot of people who this is just devastating for them. I don't even want to think about that. So, but yeah, Tropicana Field. This is definitely the beginning of the end for Tropicana Field. Regardless, I don't really see how it comes back from something like this. At least the same. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, now the Rays are homeless for the time being. And speaking of, well, not homeless, but 2 teams might need new owners because the American League Central, the Twins and the White Sox, are reportedly open to selling their teams. So we'll start with the Twins, who are owned by the Pohlad family. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's Pohlad. The Pohlad family, who have owned the Twins since 1984. They bought them in 1984 for $44 million. They're the 4th longest tenured ownership in Major League Baseball. They're interested in selling the Twins. The Twins are estimated to be between $1.5 and $2 billion. The Twins were actually nearly contracted by Major League Baseball in 2001, along with the Expos, because of financial problems. However, that fell through. And, the Twins, they've had a lot of success in the 21st century. They've won a lot of division titles and they've made a lot of playoff appearances, but they've never really had a lot of playoff success. Obviously, they've lost to the Yankees a bunch of times. They finally ended their postseason series losing streak against the Blue Jays in the wild card series last year, but they just really haven't had much else to cheer about. And this was a statement from the family. After months of thoughtful consideration, our family reached a decision this summer to explore selling the Twins as we enter the next phase of the process. The time is right to make this public. So that's the That's from the Twins side. And the other one, the White Sox side, is a little more intriguing because obviously the White Sox are coming off the worst season in Major League Baseball history with a historically disgusting 41-121 record. Jerry Reinsdorf obviously is the owner of the White Sox. He's one of the most notorious owners in all of sports. And Reinsdorf, as many people thought, and myself included, he wouldn't go away until he was in the grave, basically. That's the way that many people thought that, this would go down. However, he did say he is open to sell. He's open to negotiations and selling the White Sox. And currently he's actually in negotiations with former Major League pitcher Dave Stewart, who had a very successful career in the 80s and early 90s. Stewart apparently is overseeing an ownership group. And that ownership group has actually been in talks with the Women's Soccer League, and they've been trying to get a women's soccer team in Nashville. So I mean, I don't know if they would maybe look to do the same for the White Sox if they were to buy the White Sox. But it's interesting. I mean, regardless, I think the White Sox have to be sold. Reinsdorf has done more harm than good to that organization in recent years. There's also been talk, obviously, of the White Sox trying to get a new stadium. Reinsdorf, bought the White Sox for $20 million in 1981. They're worth $2.5 billion right now, or $2.05 billion right now. So yeah, it's interesting, and we'll see if either of these teams get sold in the offseason. But the Twins right now obviously have had more success than the White Sox have had. The White Sox need something. They need to do something, and interest in the team is way down was way down this year, understandably so. The Twins are obviously also coming off of a disappointing season in which they only finished 82-80. So, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and it figures that the two teams that we're talking about right now are the only two teams in the AL Central that weren't in the playoffs this year. So, the Twins specifically, I do think that, they obviously they're in the Minnesota, Minneapolis area. They probably can kind of figure something out there. The White Sox, they're coming off of one of the worst seasons, not only in franchise history, but in league history. Like you mentioned, they need a shape up in any way, shape, or form possible. They're obviously where they are located in Chicago. They're not located in the right kind of area. They're not located in the nicer, I guess, per se. The northern side. I've been to Wrigley Field before. That's kind of the nicer area of Chicago. So, I feel like in terms of the White Sox, Reinsdorf bought the White Sox for $20 million in 1981 and now worth $2.5 billion. I think that, they have to kind of see how they want to look at their long-term plans. They're one of the teams that don't pay a lot of guys specifically. They're probably going to, Chris Getz said throughout this season that they're planning to shed payroll, then obviously add payroll, which tells me specifically that they're just going into a position of a massive, massive rebuild. They would also have a lot of kind of promising prospects coming up. So maybe this is kind of a way to kind of give, I guess, fans hope, is to be like, all right, if we don't have a lot of promise, just the stuff that's on the field, well, we got to kind of figure what's going to have to come off the field. And maybe this is something that maybe we weren't kind of thinking about throughout the season. But, when you have a season that you just went through and, you're trying to figure out kind of what is next for your team, this might have to be a unfortunate but a reality type of situation.
Yeah, it is definitely interesting, and many White Sox fans have been fed up with Reinsdorf for years for not spending or spending poorly. So the White Sox definitely need a massive shakeup, and like you mentioned, they are going to be going through yet another long rebuild. It's really sad. It really is.
They were looked at for a while in like the early 2010s. Like they were always competitive, and Chicago. It's a Chicago market. It's not like it's a small market. Some smaller market type of teams you can kind of maybe understand it, but this is a bigger type of market. And Chicago baseball, when Chicago baseball is going well, it's just like New York. It's just like Boston. When those type of big market teams play well, it's not only good for their teams, but it's good for the market and it's good for the city. So when you have a team like this that's basically kind of going in a opposite direction than good, it's just a really hard thing to see.
Yes. So we'll see if either of these two teams have new ownership groups by next season. And we're almost out of time here, but we just want to quickly touch on our last topic, which is the Gold Glove finalists, where the nominees have been released. And quickly, I just want to quickly touch on the outfield. So the left field finalists for Gold Glove are Colton Cowser, Stephen Kwan, and Alex Verdugo. In the American League, I got no problem with most of that. Center field, though, it's Jarren Duran. That's fine. Jake Myers, though, and Dalton Varsho. How are Myers and Varsho on this list and not Judge? I'm really curious. Judge has been around for a long time, and yet he's never won a Gold Glove award. And from what I've seen, he's one of the most fundamentally sound outfielders I've in baseball. I mean, he rarely makes an error. I mean, he takes good routes. I mean, he's made a couple of good defensive plays so far in the postseason as well. He's got a great arm. It's shocking. I know he's gonna win his second MVP award this season. How he has not won a Gold Glove is one of the biggest mysteries to me. It doesn't.
J-Rod. I know J-Rod obviously was hurt, but J-Rod, you're telling me that J-Rod couldn't be in this list as center field over the guys that are there? Come on.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And also, look, I'm a Yankee fan. I like Juan Soto. He should not be nominated for a Gold Glove. All right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He's shaky, and plus, Judge is a much better fielder than Soto. I mean, you look at it. I mean, I guess the right field caliber this year was not that great in the American League. But I mean, look, Soto is terrific, but he should not be a Gold Glove nominee. All right, and that's my 2 cents on that. And in the National League, I'm just looking around quickly. I mean, in the National League, I do agree with pretty much most of the National League. But yeah, I just wanted to get that off my chest. I don't know if you had any other complaints about the Gold Glove nominees.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Francisco Lindor should be in the National League, but we're out of time here, so I can go on and on about Lindor. I love him, so that's.
Well, we may touch upon this in next week's episode, but yeah, we are out of time here, unfortunately. But thank you very much for tuning into this episode of Hitting for the Cycle. On behalf of Ben Kruse, I'm Ryan Touhey. We'll see you next week, and we'll see who's in the World Series.